to have more effective impact, have advanced this impact, optimize this impact, but also demonstrate this impact so we can actually make it better after. And the person who's going to help us do that, who's going to guide us through these 3 days, is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Canterbury, New Zealand. She is the conference chair for us these 3 days, and she's the one I'm going to give the floor to, Cheryl Delaray.
Greetings to all. I'm really delighted to welcome all our participants, speakers and guests to the 2021 ICIS Impact of Science Conference. We are very pleased to have joining us at this event policymakers, university leaders, leaders of research councils, industry leaders, and representatives from governments from all across the world. ICIS is the international network for advancing and evaluating the societal impact of science, and it has successfully organized this annual conference on the impact of science 8 times. Regrettably, due to the risks and restrictions associated with the ongoing pandemic, we are not able to meet in person, and this conference is taking place in an online environment only. However, our very professional organizing team have spared no effort to offer us as many opportunities as possible to connect the participants, the speakers, and our guests in an interactive and meaningful way. I trust you will agree that never before has there been a more opportune time than this to discuss, debate, and deliberate on the impact of science. I'm sure we're all familiar with those oft-used adjectives to describe the times we currently live in. Unprecedented, historic, once in a century are just a few of these frequently used adjectives. But what we have seen over the past year or more is that science has gained increasing visibility. Almost every member of the public has become aware of the critical role of science in society and its impact. Many governments across the world are relying on and continue to rely on the science advice offered to them to manage their national responses and their planning for the post-pandemic era. Using scientific evidence, modeling, governments are making momentous decisions that have a direct impact on our daily lives, our freedom to move about, and what we have hitherto taken for granted. We have also seen scientists get together to produce the fastest vaccine development and rollout in the history of humanity. But paradoxically, perhaps, at the same time, there has been increased questioning of the credibility and legitimacy of science, and our international scientific community has faced increasing challenges from several quarters. And we've also regrettably seen how this pandemic has disproportionately impacted on underserved communities and developing countries. Thus, I believe it's appropriate that this year's Impact of Science Conference will focus on the theme, the transformative power of research. And it brings together professionals, leaders, and those who are involved in the impact of science from all over the world. The crisis has thrown extended light on the need for more inclusive approaches, both to science and its impact. We're dealing with the pandemic over and above all the other grand challenges such as climate change, poverty, and inequality across our regions. Given where we are at this historic time, I believe that there's no better host for us at this point for this conference than South Africa. South Africa has been working on a national impact agenda and ways to shorten the research impact cycle. And particularly here, we will be hearing from South Africa's National Research Council and the leadership role they're playing. I believe there are many lessons that we can learn from South Africa's experience, and particularly how South Africa is gaining skills and knowledge on how to deploy science to tackle social problems. It is now my pleasure to invite the Vice Chancellor of our host institution, the University of Cape Town, Professor Mamokgethi Phakeng, to address us and offer words of welcome. Mamokgethi.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Deputy Minister Buti Manamela, Professor Cheryl De La Rey, and fellow researchers, good morning. Kia ora, Jambo, Dumelang, Goeiemorgen, Molweni from the University of Cape Town. While the transformative power of research is widely recognized among researchers, studies that focus on that very topic show that it is not so readily understood by people who live in the developing world. This is, of course, one of the results of the inequality gap. People who lack access to technology, to healthcare, reliable transport, higher education, and even such basics as food and shelter are less likely to recognize the benefits that science offers. A 2018 Gallup poll reported that in most countries with higher than normal levels of income inequality, less than half of the people surveyed said they were aware that science benefits people like them. This was in direct contrast to the global north, where most people said they were benefiting from science. China stood out from this trend. 82% of the people who were polled in that country felt their standard of living was improving. Analysts attributed this belief to dramatic growth that has also brought broad-based economic optimism among the Chinese population. Professor Thumbi Ndungu, the deputy director at the African Health Research Institute, pointed out in 2019 that most Africans feel left out of the advances that science offers. He said, and I quote, "There is some positive perception about science and vaccines in particular, and their ability to change society and improve quality of life in Africa. On the other hand, it is worrying that people see themselves as being excluded from the benefits of science through the way we are doing science and the way it is being delivered. So there's a need to bridge that gap to ensure that science has impact in communities. After all, that's why we do science," close quote. Historically, the value of research has been measured largely by researchers. I mean, we respond to each other's conclusions, either with support or disagreement. We cite each other, base new studies on previous insights and discoveries, reference each other's articles in our teaching and reports. Our thought leadership is determined by global university rankings, agencies such as Times Higher Education or QS, in terms of number of citations we accrue. This is not criticism, because collegial discourse and academic debate play a vital role in keeping us accountable in our methodology and research ethics. But there is room for even socially responsive research to go much further in transforming society. Africans, and of course, people in other parts of the global south need to know that scientific research is not reserved for a privileged few. This is especially important as the world proceeds into the fourth industrial revolution. For technology to benefit people in developing countries, they need the opportunity to co-create technical solutions that meet their real needs on the ground. Of course, for economic optimism to grow in other parts of the developing world on the same scale as in China, we need to strengthen collaboration between science, business, and government. Increasing the awareness of research and its benefits at grassroots level can also strengthen our case with these important stakeholders. One way to build this kind of awareness is to disrupt the way we view the spaces where we conduct research. United Arab Emirates researchers Fikri Abu Zidan and Dia Risk have touched on the importance of involving local communities in research. And they say, and I quote, "Developing countries should not follow the research models that led to the scientific enterprise in developed countries. Instead, they should develop their own models that stem from their understanding of their own needs, goals, and surrounding environment, and devise methods to reach these goals, close quote. I suggest that we take this idea even further by opening up the research and reporting process to involve members of the communities where we conduct our research. We all condemn the practice of helicopter science, where researchers from the global north come into these spaces, our spaces, and leave with African data. But when we present only our research, academic view of the research we are conducting, even as African scientists, we often leave out the voices of the people we are studying or the local people who assisted in collecting the data or compiling the information. This can be seen as another form of helicopter science. Boom, into the township or the rural area and get out. If we speak on their behalf, if we don't co-create with them, if we do not present a platform for them to own their voices. For instance, we collect our data from a low economic township like Michel's Plain, which is in Cape Town. And I suggest that we find a way to include in our methodology and presentation and voices of the Michel's Plains residents we are researching. I could have pointed at another area in Rotorua, New Zealand. I could have done that. It's the same all over the world, that we collect data. If we collect data from marginalized people, low socioeconomic people, then we should think about how do we include their voices? How do they view the problem you are researching to solve, or you are trying to solve, and the questions you are asking? How do they interpret the findings you are presenting and your conclusions? What insights did they provide that influence your investigation and analysis? And can they present those insights themselves in their own voices? What would they sound like? Or perhaps present them whether through co-authoring or doing presentations together with you. Many research projects in South Africa are located in poor communities. I should say, actually, in Africa, it is mainly poor communities that are over-researched. That's not to say that's good or bad. Such research can influence government policy and even lead to groundbreaking solutions, but still not include the voices of the people who are being studied in our programs. In 2019, we launched one of my favorite cutting-edge Aerobiology TB research facility in Masiphumelele, right here in Cape Town, an amazing facility. I mean, I feel like I should get the president of the country to come and see it. It's located right in the midst of an informal settlement in Cape Town, working very closely with the community. I mean, the community feel like they own the space. I mean, you interact with them, they're young people, women are there in the community interacting with researchers. And I say to the colleagues there, it's an amazing collaboration. I want us to push it a little further. Just imagine one of the women who works in that facility, if they were given the opportunity for their own opinion, their own voice to be heard during a conference presentation. Imagine the power of that. Not only of our research, but for that woman, the power for that woman personally and for her community. This could be another way of empowering these communities and giving them an opportunity to participate in their own transformation. As the inequality gap grows wider, we need to use every opportunity to bridge that gap. The World Bank recognized this need 21 years ago when it published a volume entitled Voices of the Poor, Can Anyone Hear Us? The book compiles the stories of 40,000 people from 50 poor countries. Most of them said at the time that they felt they were much worse off than in past decades. Just imagine what they must feel today in the midst of COVID-19. James Wolfenson, who was president of the World Bank at the time, wrote this in the introduction. I want to quote it. He said, what is it that the poor reply when asked what might make the greatest difference in their lives? Well, they say, organizations of their own so that they may negotiate with government, with traders and with non-governmental organizations. Direct assistance through community-driven programs so that they may shape their own destinies. local ownership of funds so that they may put a stop to corruption. They want non-governmental organizations and governments to be accountable to them. These are strong voices, voices of dignity, close quote. People who may never set foot on a university campus or in a laboratory need to know that research is changing their lives. They also need to realize that they can play an important role in the research process. By working with researchers, they can transform their own lives, but we need to create that opportunity for them to do so. The challenge we face as researchers today is not necessarily to identify and analyze a problem and its possible solutions. It is to work with the people who are affected by the problem, to co-create solutions that they can use to change their own lives. In that way, we will not only bring trust into our science, but we give them an opportunity to participate in the transformation of their own lives and their societies. And I submit to you that this is the true transformative power of research. Welcome to Cape Town. I hope you find value in this conference, and all of you not only talk about the transformative power of research, but you leave transformed as a researcher. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pakeng, and thank you for introducing the theme of the conference as powerfully as you have. It is now my honor and privilege to invite the Honorable Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation, South Africa, to welcome us as the official country host of this event on the impact of science. Honorable Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair of the conference, Professor Cheryl de la Rey, Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Professor Mamokgethi Pakeng, and our esteemed guests from various parts of the country, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you on this important occasion. You could not have chosen a better and more apt theme for this conference, which is transformative power of research. The focus on the transformative power of research is particularly important in the context of what is arguably the biggest challenge of our time, which is the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has not just changed the manner in which our global healthcare system functions, but it has also forced us to radically rethink our existing approaches to both the production and application of knowledge. This is particularly true for the medical sciences. The societal impact of research is not necessarily a discourse, but one that simply continues to find renewed relevance as humanity moves through various historical epochs. To demonstrate this point, in the current epoch, one of the key factors which the relevance of all research is measured is the extent to which such research helps us to build a more equal and a more human world. In the South African context, the issue of social impact of research is central to all our research and innovation efforts. Impact in its various dimensions is about having influence on societal change. As a country, we would like to increase the positive impact that research has on broader society in responding to the national developmental goals and in contributing to the achievement of our country's national vision as articulated in our National Development Plan 2030. This, we believe, is the transformative role that science and research can play today. Like many countries at the same level of development, South Africa faces various societal challenges that we believe can be alleviated through research and the implementation of its findings. Our commitment to transformative research has also informed our response to international priorities such as outlined in the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals. Therefore, finding sustainable research solutions to these challenges is a key priority to us as a country. At a policy level, our recently adopted white paper on science, technology, and innovation seeks to bolster our research effort by placing greater emphasis on inclusivity, transformation, partnerships, to address policy coherence, the development of human capabilities, knowledge expansion, innovation performance, and increased investment that will result in the economic, socio-political, and how all our citizens can enjoy the intellectual benefits of science, technology, and innovation. Equally important, we're in the process of finalizing a decadal plan for science, technology, and innovation, through which we will be implementing our white paper on science, technology, and innovation. This is our approach because we believe it is important for all our key players across our country's national system of innovation and beyond to develop coherent ways of working together and co-create research in order to increase and advance the impact of science. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that cooperation and collaboration should extend across our borders as we endeavor to engage with challenges facing the African continent and beyond. For this reason, we believe that researchers and scientists must find effective ways of working together with civil society, business, industry, and government to advance a positive impact. A key element in this regard is evidence-informed policy making in government. Furthermore, we strongly believe that research must increasingly feed into our country's policy-making process so as to ensure that we respond effectively to the challenges we face as a country. Researchers and government officials should therefore not work in isolation, but should ensure an engaged approach to research and policy development. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, impact can only be achieved when institutions and researchers purposefully work together across the impact pathway and research process, from the initial conceptualization and funding foundational research through outputs, outcome, and the eventual innovations and use of research by society, by business, and also government and industry. Given the configuration of our national system of innovation, there is therefore an urgent need for increased interdependence between government entities who must work together to stimulate and demonstrate the impact of research on society. In conclusion, I'm delighted to see that your conference programs include a collection of renowned scientists who will be sharing their perspectives on a number of key scientific and policy topics. I have no doubt that the outcome of your deliberations will be of great value to South Africa, our continent, and the world, particularly those countries that are represented in this conference. On behalf of the Minister and myself, I wish you a productive and exciting conference, and we certainly look forward to the deliberations that will be taking place over the course of this conference. Thank you very much, Chair of Conference.
Thank you, Honourable Deputy Minister Manamela. Thank you for your warm words of welcome and for informing us just how seriously South Africa takes the impact of science and the potential it has for transforming our societies at a national level, regionally, and beyond. We've heard from our two speakers, Professor Pakeng and the Deputy Minister, and it's now my pleasure to introduce the speakers in our first plenary panel, who will be speaking on the topic of the transformative nature and role of science in society. This is a plenary session where we will be addressing a number of key questions, starting from the point of departure that it is insufficient for scientists to have a relationship with society that is simply based on disseminating their science and information. As we've heard from the Deputy Minister and from Professor Pakeng, what we really have to think about is the changing nature and how to transform the relationship between scientists and our societies at every level of our communities. We will be addressed on these questions by a number of eminent speakers it's now my pleasure to introduce. And the first of our speakers is David Sweeney, who is the inaugural Executive Chair of Research England. It's a new council that was established as part of UK Research and Innovation alongside the 7 disciplinary research councils. David, we look forward to your input this evening and learning from your experience on this very important topic at this time in our history.
Thanks very much. That was a great start to the conference. So many conferences begin with words of welcome that are great, but are a formality. We have had already 2 major challenges. And I think my role at the start of this conference is to set out how I feel we can address some of those challenges by deriving as much benefit as we can from meeting together. My core message is that it is people that make the difference. It is you who are attending this conference who will put into practice addressing the challenges that have been put to us by Professor Pakeng and the Deputy Minister. Let us not look around at others and ask how they will do it. Let us think how we will do it ourselves and together. Let me just share a screen and talk about a few slides, although I'm not going to, I'm going to use this as a framing mechanism, and it would be great if I could get the slideshow to play. Hold a second. And I want slideshow play from beginning. Thanks very much. So we're here to talk about the transformative role. We have to start, of course, with the pandemic. There have been glorious successes, and there have been areas where we have not achieved what we would have liked to do. The commitment of our scientists has been phenomenal and never clearer. But let me move away from the most obvious areas of attention around, particularly in the UK, the need to deliver a vaccine and our capability to repurpose elements of our system to pivot work that was going on towards the immediate delivery of a vaccine. We had established that opportunity. It was great to do it, but the response of our scientists has been way beyond that. In many cases, significant in ameliorating a really grim episode. And also, I have to be fair to say, an episode where our initial steps were rather faltering in the UK, but which I think we made a great recovery from. Science is not just about vaccines. Science obviously is about therapeutics. It's about how we cope with the effects on our institutions. It's about very crude things like the provision of extra lab facilities for work that's going on previously occupied on other activities. It's about bringing the power of our universities with their commitment to their people, their students, their staff into play. It's about a collective attitude, which of course is exactly how we'll achieve a response to the challenges that we've already heard about in the conference. There was a phenomenal opportunity for scientists to lead. And in the UK, where I was not personally actively involved, but I'm in day-to-day contact with those who are as part of my job, so a great observer, I'm impressed and proud of what we have done. We have impacted every aspect of university and research life in the way the system has responded. We've delivered on local scales, on national scales, and we've demonstrated care and commitment. But there are areas where we have learned. We have withheld advice when we didn't have the evidence. That is the way it must be. The distinctive contribution of science is to build on evidence, not to pretend the world is the way that we might like it to be, which is certainly a challenge in some of the behavioral issues, behavioral science issues we face, but to base on the evidence. The evidence in many areas was insufficiently clear, and we must learn from that about where we need to better develop evidence and we need to be able to deploy it. And some of the comments that have been made already about understanding the people we are working with, understanding their motivations, showing insights way beyond the dispassionate nature of science, but to human intellect and understanding is frankly an area where I think we could have done better. The challenge for this conference, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the diverse set of opportunities there are, the question I want you all to be asking as you go from session to session is, what can you do? Science is about people, it's about the response of individuals, and you are here. You are not here to listen, you are here to interact and to engage and ensure that we work together, because not only is it about us as individuals, it is about the way we work. We need inspiration, and unless you are someone of phenomenal caliber, you derive your inspiration from others as well as inside you. Watching others struggle and realizing that you may have something to contribute is a key element of the team science that we aspire to. Understanding the challenges that people are facing and bringing your enthusiasm is essential. You must individually and collectively think about the risks there are involved in science, and some of the risks we have addressed during the pandemic. The risk has crystallized. We have not managed to mitigate it, but we are then often in a position to respond. Accountability is could not be more important during the pandemic. We have a huge science system around the world, the result of a substantial amount of public funding, as well as, of course, lots of private funding, and we are accountable for that. We have had some challenging conversations in the UK about whether science has played the part that it could have, and it is right that we should face those challenges and we should answer them. We do not live, and this is very obvious in a pandemic, in a perfect world. Pragmatism occasionally has to triumph over idealism. However, and a subject particularly of interest to us in the UK, where is the science system not best fitted for purpose? And I think Professor Pakeng has identified several significant areas. So we need an idealistic view of how we might change the system. Here at this conference, you will hear talks that are very practical. There will be things that you can put into practice, but you will also hear those, and your immediate response may be, that is unachievable. Well, it may be immediately unachievable, but it is where we may want to get to, and only by engaging with those who think in idealistic and immediately unrealistic ways will we change what we do. So yes, pragmatism balanced with idealism. It is you who will have opportunities. A huge number of people at this conference, many of you in the early to middle stages of your careers. You are learning. You have the capacity to change the world by working together. And we are privileged to have with us many leaders who will provide the vision. So research needs the efforts of lots and lots of different kinds of people, but also lots and lots of different kinds of skills. I started off life as a statistician, trying to ensure that the evidence we gave to our scientists about the directions they took was rigorously developed and reliable. And although I've moved away from that now, I actually feel that in many ways we've had insufficient statistical support over the last 40 years. I remember my very first day on the 16th of August 1976 in the Research Institute where I started work. thinking about the next, as I thought, 40 years. It's turned out to be a bit longer than that, actually, and thinking what could be achieved. Now, of course, I had no idea, and I was very limited in my expectations. It is thanks, as I'll say in a moment, to others I've interacted with that the opportunities have increased. So what is I'm slightly sensitive about the phrases such as build back better, which are the sort of thing that politicians say. And I ponder and think, is this rhetoric? But actually, I do realize that sometimes politicians actually capture what the challenge is. I spend my life interacting with politicians, and they are wonderful, but sometimes they don't quite see things the way we see them. In this case, I think they are right to set forward that objective. In order to deliver it, what can you do, was my first question. My second one is, how do you fit in? Because as has already been said, the contribution of individuals can only be a small part of our collective response, where we learn from each other and work together. But I'm putting that question down for you actually to ask yourselves, who are the people you are interacting with, and how will you learn lessons during this conference that helps you interact better as you go? What do you bring to those collaborations? Modesty is a great virtue, but too much of it will hinder you from developing your potential. You should seek advice from others on your strengths, but you should also have the confidence to think what you could bring. I had enormous confidence on my first day in the job as a statistician. I knew all the techniques. I knew, as it happened, almost nothing about applying the techniques, and I found some short, sharp shocks as I learned what real experiments were about. However, what I was taught at university was good. I was able to apply it. I could learn, I could bring those statistical techniques, but I had to fit in working in that environment with experimental horticulturists who are primarily interested in growing food, not in the science. So there was a difficulty in communication which I had to learn. We need to think, I think, wider than institutions. We need to think of the sector as an ecosystem. I think we're used to that. But for this conference, it's how do you fit into this? What do you bring? What can you contribute? We've already had a call to look at local, national, and international challenges. And my job in the UK at the moment is largely about balancing the need to address the problems and challenges of all of our citizens in all parts of the country. And I think we've already had from Professor Pakane very strong signals on that. As scientists, we take sometimes a very dispassionate view, but we do need to understand the issues facing society in terms of people's own responses and insights, which are not always based on the evidence. And we have to respect the fact that in democratic societies, sometimes directions will be taken that is contrary to the evidence. But nevertheless, we cannot walk away from those situations. We have to understand why directions are being taken. And I think the sessions here today that will, at this conference, that will bring insight into that. We need to understand our strengths and weaknesses and be willing to be self-critical. So you will look around during the conference and you will think, actually, I don't agree with that. Well, that's good. I think if you end up on the top of a mountain as the only person who thinks something, then there may be a challenge. But I do think you've got to be realistic about what we can do and what we can't do. And of course, about shared responsibilities. So what can you do? What can you learn in this conference? What you can do? How can you fit in team working with others? What will you bring to that team? who will you spark off? Who are the people who will bring out the best in you? And at various points in my career, I've felt perhaps I was moving along steadily, but perhaps not responding to new challenges. And I've been grateful to people who have offered me new challenges and who have been provocative in the questions they ask. And again, at the conference, you must look out for people who are being provocative. You must avoid being defensive, but equally, of course, there will be things you just won't agree with. What are the things you do agree with? What are the things that are exciting you? And lastly, really, who will I help? Now, as it happens in my career, I've spent quite a long time doing various activities. I haven't moved around a lot. And I've benefited tremendously from people who have perhaps recognized that that's where I was in my career and offered me opportunities. Even in my very first role in a research institute, I remember the tea room discussions where I would ask, what were the drivers for our research institute? The people who had been there for years, well, they might have thought, what is this newcomer doing, challenging what we're doing? They just were willing to discuss and engage and put up with the fact that probably my questions were not very well designed or aimed. Who is around you who can be annoying in their questions, but nevertheless will be the people with insight for the future? Who can you mentor and help if we use the formal language? But so much of this is about day-by-day interactions rather than formal systems of mentoring. For this conference, the opportunities are huge. We're going to learn about the role that different kinds of people can play. I'm not sure I found a session for what statisticians bring specifically, but more generally in developing evidence, that is there. We are there for insights into how others see the system. But throughout the whole of this session, my challenge to you is what can you bring? How do you fit in? Who can you spark off? Who will you help to deliver? Professor Paquin, that was just the most brilliant of introductions, setting out the particular challenges in the Global South. For those who are here from the North, worth taking note and listening. And it's been one of the joys of my last year to work with Furu Fellow and his colleagues through the Global Research Council on responsible research assessment. The opportunities for fertilization are there. The understanding of the challenges we face, which Professor Paquin set out, are so important. I wish you well for the conference. The opportunities are here. I look forward to attending sessions, learning, because at my stage in the career, I realize how much I could have done, and still do look forward to perhaps in different roles. Welcome, grab every opportunity, enjoy the conference.
Thank you, David, and thank you for raising a provocative set of questions, but also challenges, and particularly how we at a personal level, at an institutional level, respond to those challenges, and how we may work together, both from the Global South and Global North, to address some of the big questions of our time. It's now my pleasure to invite our second speaker to address us, and our second speaker is Ismail Sergelden, who is the Emeritus Librarian of Alexandria and the founding director of Bibliotheca Alexandrina, the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, which he established. Welcome, and we look forward to your input and learning from your experience.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor to be invited to participate in this important session. If we look back dispassionately at the last 400 years, there is no doubt that science and scientific research have been responsible for all the benefits that humanity takes for granted. Ample food, production, improved health, reduced mortality, better education, and improved well-being. And gradually, as science advanced the boundaries of our knowledge, the system that transforms that new knowledge into new and innovative technologies and processes, often referred to as STI for science, technology, and innovation, took shape. And STI created the contemporary configuration of private and public sector collaborations, education and training facilities with strong ties to research and development, and legal systems that protect patents and copyrights. It has changed our way of life, improved our well-being, and vastly expanded the resources we command. It has profoundly influenced the very fabric of our societies. And our societies evolved through the crucible of wars waged with ever more devastating weapons and the gradual awakening to the importance of our values, such as human rights, the rejection of slavery and colonialism, and more recently, the protection of the environment and the promotion of sustainable development on a global scale, and the dismantling of systemic obstacles that discriminate against women and minorities in almost any field of endeavor and in almost every country. We have started to recognize the cost of past mistakes and the need for remedial action, locally, nationally, regionally, and globally. And in fact, the invitation to work with the communities, the invitation to be engaged at the human level, at the local level, as well as to be engaged with peers across the planet, is one of those new and important transformations. We face global problems, from climate change to biodiversity loss, to food security, to the mismanagement of water, to pollution of the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soils and oceans we depend on. All these global problems and their local manifestations require the full mobilization of science and the best of our scientific capabilities. And today, yes, we've just been reminded we are in the throes of a pandemic that has affected friend and foe alike, and that knows no boundaries, affecting both rich and poor countries. But those who ignored science, and the United States in particular, paid a higher price in terms of numbers of lives lost. Brazil, and more recently, India, also chose politics over science. But science matters, and science-based public policies are urgently needed to halt the COVID-19's grim march. Our global collaborative efforts are being challenged as never before. These global efforts will be needed not just to produce the tests, the therapeutics, and the vaccines that will enable us to control this scourge, but also to collaboratively produce the policies and programs that will ensure access to the poor and the deprived, as well as to the rich and the powerful. Today, we are living in societies where the ICT revolution allows us to link and exchange information at the speed of light, where social connectivity spans the globe, and where knowledge is widely shared as the scientific establishment moves towards a system of open science. Today, unfortunately, is also the time when we see the murderous merchants of hate and racism using these same ICT tools to peddle their lies and to spread their poisonous ideas. Indeed, terrorists have recruited on the web, while they manage to hide their nefarious transactions in various parts of the complex systems of the dark web. And now many weird groups who formally participate in the platforms of the new social media are launching attacks and spreading lies against science, claiming all sorts of conspiracy theories and attacking science as another form of elitist discourse to be discounted. Yet science is the only form of knowledge production that has a built-in system for correcting its mistakes, always acknowledging that our knowledge is imperfect and that we await the next revolution with its paradigm shifts, which we cannot see or at best can perceive only dimly today. For that is the task of scientific research and scientific advancement. And the same science and technology that has knitted together the global community of science is also the one that empowers those who would attack science and its role in society. We have few tools to fight back against those who spread lies and falsehoods, but truth, ever the banner to which true scientists and researchers rally, will ultimately defeat the web of lies that they weave on the social media made possible by the internet. They and their allies among corrupt politicians and specialized cable TV channels. And science will triumph, because science is more than knowledge and its technological applications. It also builds on a system of values. Yes, there are the values of science. But if the product of scientific research is value neutral, the application of it is not, and the system for the production of that science is very value loaded. You know, as Bronowski observed almost, I would say, half a century or 3/4 of a century ago, the enterprise of science requires the adoption of certain values: truth, honor, teamwork, constructive subversiveness, engagement with the other, freedom, imagination, and the method for the arbitration of disputes. The values of science are adhered to by its practitioners with a rigor that shames all other professions. Take truth. Any scientist who manufactures data is ostracized forever from the scientific community. She or he may err in interpreting the data, but no one can accept fabrication of data. In no other field of human activity is this commitment to truth so absolute. And honor. The second biggest crime is plagiarism. Scientists reject plagiarism. To give each his or her due is essential. It is a sentiment well captured in Newton's famous statement that if I have seen farther than most, it is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. And teamwork has become essential in most fields of science. In fact, I just read that the largest number of co-authors on a single paper exceeded 5,000. And that's quite a number to give recognition to. But the essence of teamwork is to ensure that all members of the team receive the recognition that they deserve. Science advances by overthrowing the existing paradigm, or at least significantly expanding or modifying it. Thus, there is a certain constructive subversiveness built into scientific enterprise. As a new generation of scientists makes its own contribution, it challenges the past, and so it must be. Without that, there would be no scientific advancement. But our respect and admiration for Newton is not diminished by the contributions of Einstein. We can and do admire them both. Now, this constant renewal and advancement of our scientific understanding is a feature of the scientific enterprise, and it requires tolerant engagement with the contrarian view and accepting to arbitrate disputes by the rules of evidence and rationality. Science also requires freedom. Freedom to inquire, to challenge, to think, to imagine the unimagined. It cannot function within the arbitrary limits of convention, nor can it flourish if it is forced to shy away from challenging the accepted. Science demands rationality and promotes civility in discourse. Ad hominem attacks are not accepted. Science treats all humans equally. Scientists are concerned by the content of the scientific work, not by the person who produced it. And thus, science is open to all, regardless of nationality, race, religion, or sex. Built-in obstacles that discriminate and have discriminated against women and minorities are being identified and removed even as we speak. Now, these values of science that I've just described are not just necessary for the scientific enterprise to function. They are societal values worth defending, not just to promote the pursuit of science, but to have a better and more humane society. These are parts of the central core of universal values that any truly modern society must possess. And the interaction between science and society is what advances these universal values in society and throughout the globe. Today, science is a global enterprise, and the scientists of the world have forged the bonds that have created a global scientific community that speaks a common language and adheres to these norms of behavior with an unmatched rigor. Now, beyond these values of science, there are, of course, other values that contemporary societies must adopt as well. And these include empathy, altruism, appreciation of beauty and the arts, understanding and respecting our interaction with the environment, respect for and support the rule of law, refusing poverty and hunger in the midst of plenty, challenging inequality, and so much more. Now, all these values attached also to the values that I call the values of science, and when widespread acceptance would bring to our society more goodness, beauty, liberty, equality, and justice. But that may sound very visionary and far away. Where are we now? Our age is very much the age of science. There are more scientists working today than all the scientists who practiced throughout the previous history of humanity combined. We live in the era of science, information, and knowledge. Actually, we live in an era of enormous data. And data, when organized, becomes information. And information, when explained, becomes knowledge. But we need more than knowledge. We need wisdom. Thus, to cope with the complex realities of our times, from interaction between people in complex and diverse societies, to interacting with the environment in a meaningful and sustainable way, we need knowledge, but we need more. We need wisdom. Therefore, to the knowledge generated by the natural sciences, we need the insights of the social sciences and the wisdom of the humanities. Now, the first three industrial revolutions that transformed our modern society, with each of these three advancements, from steam engine, the age of science and mass production, and now the rise of the digital technology, the world around us fundamentally changed. And we are on the cusp of a new revolution, with artificial intelligence predicted by McKinsey to be 3,000 times more disruptive than the previous industrial revolutions, moving at 100 times the speed of the industrial age that started in the latter part of the 18th century. It was called by Klaus Schwab in 2016 the fourth industrial revolution. So if we are now at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution, we must understand that its hallmark is the blurring of the boundaries between the physical, digital, and biological world. Most people look at the transformations in ICT, whether it is artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, but equally important is the enormous transformation taking place in both our understanding and our ability to work with biological organisms, whether it is genetic engineering and other forms of genome editing. And now we are also looking at quantum computing and even writing information straight into DNA. Now, this new revolution that brings together and converges bioinfo and nanotechnologies promises to unleash capacities beyond our imagination and will potentially empower us to correct many, if not all, of our past mistakes in dealing with climate change, biodiversity loss, and the spread of poverty, hunger, and inequality, from gender to ethnic discrimination, from income to wealth disparities. For ultimately, we are also starting to confront different kinds of challenges. And many of these challenges raise, well, different kinds of ethical dilemmas. In my father's time, nothing could be more clear-cut than whether someone was alive or dead. Today, the new medical technologies have created profound new ethical dilemmas as to when to connect someone to the machines that can keep them alive and when to pull the plug, and who makes the decision to do so. Now, these end-of-life scenarios are well known, and they transcend the dual-use arguments about whether this technology is useful or dangerous. That kind of dual-use argument is applied to everything from the invention of fire to the kitchen knife to modern rifles to gain-of-function studies on new viruses under study. And the end-of-life arguments have a moral dimension, and they can be expected to increase in the near future as modern medicine continues its enormous advances under the combined inputs of the ICT revolution and the new biology. Already we can read the firing of neurons. We can give a paraplegic person the ability to think and transform these thoughts into writing at 90 characters per minute. And at the other end of the life cycle, studies on embryos require careful guidance, monitoring, and evaluation. And that brings the values of society into public debate, and the formulation of technologies must subject their deployment to the guidance of those who understand the technology, but those who represent also society and its values. So does our pending work with the useful capabilities inherent in the fourth industrial revolution? For not everything that is technically feasible is necessarily ethically desirable. But I have confidence in our societies that came together in this century and confirmed a collective global view, starting with the Millennium Development Goals from 2000-2015 and the currently globally adopted Sustainable Development Goals, to guide our collective actions from 2015 to 2030 and beyond. By adopting science-based policies and evidence-based regulations and committed to the values that we hold dear, science will be there to help our societies to overcome obstacles and to chart the path forward. Together, all armed with these values, we can think of the unborn, remember the forgotten, give hope to the forlorn, include the excluded, reach out to the unreached, and by our actions from this day onwards, lay the foundations for a better tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sergelden, for a very rich address and for especially drawing our attention to how, at the core level, the values of science are linked to public good. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all our participants and to encourage you to share your questions for our panelists and your thoughts. We will have enough time after all of our panelists speak to us to address your questions and to hear their perspectives on some of the comments that you submit to us. So please do send your questions and comments. Our next speaker is from our host nation, South Africa, the Chief Executive Officer of the National Research Foundation, Dr. Fulufelo Nelbomondo. We look forward to your address, and we're excited by the encouraging work that the National Research Foundation is doing, looking at pathways to impact.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Morning, colleagues. I think the context around the power of research and its ability to transform and impact society for the betterment of all actors involved has been given by all speakers that spoke before me this morning. So I won't repeat that. Along the same vein, however, it's worth to highlight the following, that the South African National Research Foundation has highlighted the critical role that science plays in transforming society in our recent Vision 2030, which is developed around 4 priority areas of transformation, impact, excellence, and sustainability. We believe that through science and research, South Africa can respond effectively to its various national developmental priorities and to overcome many of the challenges that society faces. It's worth again highlighting that the challenges that we face as a society are not bound by our academic disciplines. It's also very important to bring together all ideas, methodologies, and the values of science that Ismail spoke of from across all the areas of academia in order for us to then develop the new ways of thinking and responding to the challenges that we face. Transformation is certainly very key in the South African context, given our history. And demographic transformation is one of the NRF's core priorities. However, we see transformation in a very bigger context than just demographic transformation. We believe that the science system can play a very important role in transforming society through the type of research that we focus on and the changes that it brings about in society. For this reason, the NRF transformation framework emphasizes not only the demographic change, but transforming both the knowledge enterprise and the relationship between science and society. In transforming the knowledge enterprise towards an increased focus on the impact of research, the NRF is in the process of analyzing a framework to advance the societal and knowledge impact of research across our mandate areas. This framework highlights the need to increase support for research that responds to societal challenges and adopts transformation as a critical element and outcome of the framework. A key question to start with is perhaps, what is impact? How do we define impact? Impact is a beneficial change in society or knowledge advancement brought about as a direct or indirect result of the NRF's research support interventions, whether planned or unintended, whether immediate or long-term. From that very definition, we look at societal impact to be the value that the research adds to society across the various spheres, whether it's social, whether it's economic, whether it's environmental, and others. It is societal impact that reflects the relationship, whether it's direct or indirect, between the research and the improvement in the quality of lives of the people. And of course, from this definition, one can then tell that societal impact will include what is normally defined as social impact, and the impact in areas such as innovation, technological advancements, policy developments, and other areas. So that is societal impact. There's also the aspect of knowledge impact, which refers to the scientific advances that bring about the positive change within the research enterprise. So if you look at these two definitions and you look at our mandate, and also putting that against the country's current developmental state, we have identified both societal and knowledge impact as critical and have therefore included both of these definitions in our impact. As an organization, we recognize the impact of research, and we are aware that this impact often lies outside our spheres of control, and that the nature of the impact means that it is often unplanned, it's unpredictable, it changes over time. Nonetheless, we believe that it is important to shift the research enterprise towards thinking about the possible impact at the start of the research process. So from the beginning, we should actually have that long view of what is the impact of this research that I'm doing going to be. For this reason, we will purposefully support research methodologies that will increase the likelihood of impact. And some of these methodologies, you may know a number of them, that we will talk to what is known as the mission-oriented research or innovation-led research. To guide us in advancing impact, we have developed a model of pathways to impact, which Cheryl spoke of. These pathways consider the various elements of inputs, activities, outputs, and outcomes that are going to drive the impact. We recognize that the impact can result at any point along these pathways, and the elements that feed back into the pathway loop need to be considered as well. We've unpacked these pathways within our context and our mandate to understand how the NRF can best support the impact agenda. We're also introducing what we call an engaged research framework, which encourages interactions with end users from the beginning and throughout the research process. This will address the gap that was identified by Professor Pakeng in the beginning about the perception that science is reserved for the elite. and also the idea of addressing the challenges of the helicopter science. Colleagues, co-creation is a key to the research endeavor, and it is through designing and conducting research with communities, with industry, with government, and all the stakeholders, civil society, that we are most likely to see the outcomes that have societal impact. We also emphasize the importance of mission-oriented and innovation-led research, and for inter and the multi and the transdisciplinary approaches as the key enablers of impact. Assessment lies in the heart of the research impact agenda. Of course, if you can't measure it, you might not be able to get the best out of it. And it is through the assessment that we will be able to identify the research projects that we should support and that will find evidence of impact. Our approach is to focus on the assessment in 2 stages, the ex ante, which is before the research is done, and the ex post, which is after the research is done. And this is the easier one because at the ex post, impact is already evident. Additional assessment along the impact pathways will highlight the process towards impact and will advance the learnings about advancing the research impact. So the ex ante stage, at this particular stage, the purpose is to assess in order to determine which research and which researchers should we fund to maximize the impact and the return of the investment. The focus is therefore on allocation and on aligning funding with the priorities. In this regard, potential for impact together with who is involved in the research project will be critical components. The ex post stage, the purpose is to demonstrate examples of the research impact and to highlight how society benefits from that science and the transformative role that science plays. The important advocacy role will highlight for society and more broadly how research has value. This in turn will transform both society and the relationship between science and society. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to balance support for the different research types and disciplines, the NRF will develop a suite of funding instruments with different weights for different criteria, depending on the purpose and priorities. Scientific rigor remains fundamental. I need to highlight that. And all scientific disciplines, including humanities and social sciences, will be included. While we are still at the early stage of developing this impact agenda, this does not mean that research that we have supported in the past has not delivered impact. Rather, the NRF has many case studies that need to be shared to highlight to the public the key role that science has and will continue to play in developing our country. It is in our recent publication that is titled Research Excellence for Societal Benefit, a retrospective look at highlights of NRF Strategy 2020, where we highlighted outlined some of these examples. As a way of an example, and I won't get into the details here, in the area of food security, a small concept like pasteurization, which is known, which is treating of food with mild heat as a common method for eliminating pathogens and as a method of extending the shelf life of food. This is something that has been researched by various people. The challenge in this area has been to provide a cost-effective process for rural area communities, particularly where there's no electricity. And just to demonstrate this example, the Material Research Department at NRF Timber Labs undertook to design a low-cost, small-scale concentrated solar power system for doing the very same issue. What we recognized was that the overall cost of the system was then reduced. We try to make it cheaper. We try to make sure that it can suit researchers that are sitting in areas where there are no resources. The benefit of this at the end was that farmers in the rural areas now have access to the mechanism of pasteurizing milk with ease, regardless of whether they have electricity or not. The outcome is a reduced risk of contamination, prolonged shelf life of the milk now, the ability to store the milk for a longer period, transporting it for longer distances, and so on. I'm not going to get into the details. One can actually give a number of examples of this kind of work where one can actually pick the direct impact from the research. The COVID-19 pandemic also highlighted the important role of science and research in responding to the international crisis. The response emphasized the need to invest systemically over a long period of time to ensure a well-capacitated and sustainable national system. I'm not going to get into the details of these, but what we've seen is that different parts of the science system came together to inform the country's response to the pandemic. The experience gained in responding to the HIV/AIDS and the TB pandemic over many years, and the research that was conducted by the Center for AIDS Program and the research in South Africa informed the country's immediate and long-term response to the crisis. In the same vein, through the South African Radio Astronomy Observatory, we stepped in to do the research that led to the National Ventilator Project at the time that we did not have enough ventilators in the country. And that again created low-cost ventilators to the health facilities across the country. I'm just giving you this example to show some areas where impact can actually be derived from the research. So in conclusion, colleagues, the role of science and the research sector in developing our country must not be downplayed. Returning to the NRF's impact framework, I would like to take this opportunity to ask all participants and especially all the various stakeholders to share their views and contribute to the finalization of our impact framework. The document has been shared widely, and if you have not received it, please do contact us. We will be happy to share it. Further elements of the framework will be discussed later in the sessions during this conference, with Dr. Petiwe Matutu outlining aspects of the implementation tomorrow, and with Mr. Gerald Mulman discussing the assessments. And in the closing panel session on Friday, Dr. Bev Damons will participate in the discussion on the broader impacts agenda. So I do look forward to engaging with all of you in the questions and answer sessions later and throughout the rest of the conference. So let me pause here, Chair, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And we look forward to further discussions about the impact framework that the NRF has introduced. And I'm sure we'll all learn from the experiences and the thinking of yourself and the NRF. Our final speaker in our panel, but certainly not least, is Christiane Allen, who is the Associate Director of COITU, the Centre for Informed Futures at the University of Auckland. But Christiane also directs the Secretariat of the International Network for Government Science Advice, otherwise known as INGSA, which is also hosted by COITU. Christiane, we look forward to hearing your perspectives on the subject.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, esteemed colleagues, for your comments. And also thank you very much to the organizers of this conference for the opportunity to reflect on what I think are some of the fundamental issues at the heart of evidence-informed societal transformations. And most importantly, perhaps, to reflect on that space in between. And what I mean by that is the space where science for policy meets policy for science. It's a space that I think many of us inhabit, but few really have the time to examine. So now is that time. And looking at the program laid out for this conference, I really congratulate the organizers on seeking to really fully examine it. And I'll come back to that space in between in a moment. But first, if you'll allow me a very quick detour into a bit of critical theory, because it starts with the title of the plenary session that we've been asked to consider. So the transformative nature and the role of science in society. And then, of course, the overarching theme of the transformative power of research. I want to start by considering those two notions. Certainly, research and science have enormous transformative potential and indeed power, which we've all seen most recently in, for instance, how vaccine research has finally allowed a gradual reopening as the pandemic enters a more hopeful phase. That is transformative. But, and this is the point I want to make in this detour, it is by no means natural so as to be taken for granted. What I mean by that is that there is no inherent transformative nature to science, and that's because science is a social activity about which and in which societies make clear choices. Its transformative potential is actualized only if we cultivate it. And to do this, we must be deliberate and systematic about how we want to develop and shape the space in between science for policy and policy for science. Typically, these two are treated as distinct and separate domains of expertise, but in fact, they are entirely interdependent. So what does this mean in practice? Well, let's be clear. We cannot maintain research, science, and innovation systems that serve only the conventional purposes of advancing knowledge and of national economic competitiveness if we want those systems also to generate and share knowledge that will support and enable decision makers and citizens to act nationally and to connect globally on the transformative societal changes that are needed to achieve, for instance, the SDGs. We need systems that meet all of these goals, and better yet, we need systems that allow these goals to be mutually reinforcing. So for the past 6 years, I have been helping to lead the International Network for Government Science Advice by directing the Secretariat based at the University of Auckland. INGSA was developed under the auspices of what is now the International Science Council, which merges the international bodies for scientific and social science disciplines. And it began as a community of practice, but is now part of a larger global movement to harness this transformative potential of science to create progressive policy impact. Much of INGSA's work has focused on individual and institutional capacity building to support science advice to government decision makers, and thereby to promote evidence-informed policy development. In this work, we spend a lot of time sort of distinguishing and clarifying that we are about science for policy and not policy for science systems. And yet, it is inescapable. The structure of national research systems matters deeply because it sets the tone and provides the means for science to be not just generated, but also legitimated. Indeed, the way we do science has a big influence on the results we obtain. And contrary to some common belief, there really are no universals. National science and research systems vary enormously in their capabilities, in their resources, but more importantly, in their governing paradigm, in what governments and publics think science and research are for, and in how they expect these to achieve the goals. And so by examining clearly that space in between, we can start to think about linking our public policy goals with our science system responses. We can orient our research community toward more than papers and patents. But this takes a comprehensive effort, at least at 3 interdependent levels. It takes, for instance, individual skills to generate policy relevant knowledge and to broker it into the policy community. It takes organizational reforms within our public research institutions to encourage and enable researchers to engage beyond academia and industry toward policy professionals and citizens. Universities can do this by recalibrating performance measures and creating new types of professional roles for knowledge synthesizers and brokers. They can help also by creating and valorizing opportunities for transdisciplinary research and not just STEM. We've already heard about that today. And mechanisms like research impact offices alongside the tech transfer offices that began 2 decades ago. And finally, it takes systemic change at the macro level that links the national public research system to key policy areas of societal transformation. In practice, that means boundary-spanning mandates and budgets, policies and programs that promote connectedness across sectoral portfolios and between knowledge producers and governments. But it also means connecting transnationally as part of a multilateral knowledge system at the macro level. So pay attention to where public science and research mandates and budgets sit within governments. Pay attention to how governments describe those purposes, to how they are resourced, and to the transparency and diversity that they offer, and in some cases don't offer, and how open they are to the global community. These are the indicators that say a lot about the relationship between science, society, and citizens. And they are taking on a more prominent role in national systems to help shape them in a new direction. But these kinds of changes don't happen overnight. Systems are embedded in long policy and institutional legacies. One of the lessons I've learned through INGSA over the past few years is to recognize and to acknowledge the importance of national contexts. National priorities and values will differ. Resources and capabilities will vary. And governance conventions and even knowledge traditions can be distinct from country to country. These are just some of the considerations as we begin to collectively acknowledge and seriously work at the interface between science for policy and policy for science. We cannot think about the impact of knowledge without also thinking about the shape of our knowledge systems designed to produce and to share it. Fortunately, there are some great global processes that have begun to emerge in just the last few years to help make this issue more explicit and to structure our thinking on it. For instance, OECD data collected in the biennial STI Outlook survey is now finally helping to set new policy vocabulary and standards for engaged research towards societal impact and not just national competitiveness. That's new. There are also processes that many of us know about around road mapping, the UN research roadmap for COVID recovery, which came out late last year, one of those. And a process that's been ongoing for a while, the STI for SDG road mapping exercises, which are linked to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals technology facilitation mechanism. And of course, let's not forget the ISC's own action plan that includes the evolution of science systems and analyzing these in its program of work. These and other global processes are contributing to a changing paradigm for national knowledge systems to be more responsive and to help generate societal impact. And this is truly a generational change that has been accelerated into only about the last 5 years. ACES, INGSA, and many others are part of this shift that's occurring in the space in between. And again, congratulations to the conference organizers for shining a light on it. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Christiane, and thanks to all the panelists. We have a number of comments from our participants, and I'd like to encourage our participants to send further questions and comments for our panelists. But let me start off with one of the points that you've just made, Christiane. You talked about the space in between science and society, and Ismail, it resonated with some of the points you made about the inherent values of science. But yet across the world, we see how science is coming under attack. Is there a space in between what you described as the values or the core values of science and public and social good? Or does it require a greater level of intentionality, purposefulness, collective thought, and shall I say collective will on all of our parts in order to produce the transformative power of science in a more visible way? Another space in between that's come across through the comments from our participants is a question really about, is there a space in between science and the humanities that we need to close in any purposeful or direct way? So I'll put that to our panelists, and Ismail, perhaps you would like to start.
Thank you very much. I would, and just not to cite so much my credentials, but I am right now a patron of the International Science Council. And one of the things that we are very much engaged in with INGSA and with other things is precisely how we can give a voice to science. In fact, the International Science Council was created formally on the 5th of July 2018 by the merger of the International Social Science Council with ICSU, which was the umbrella organization for the natural sciences. So the idea was very much to bridge that divide that C.P. Snow had talked about, the two cultures, the problems of the two cultures and so on, that we need, and I said in my remarks that we need not only the knowledge, the hard knowledge of the natural sciences, but the insights of the social sciences and the wisdom of the humanities. And I think that we need to bring all of this to bear on decision making, because society requires that decision making in order to make wise decisions and in order to evolve our currently viewed things of what is acceptable and not acceptable in